tū poko I te hei mauri ora. A tēnā koutou katoa. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to our parents, Sky and Earth, korangi nui e tu nei, ko papa tua Nuku I tapu tu nei tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou hoki ki ngā mate kia haere. Reira, kia tatu te hunga ora tēnā tatu koutou. Greetings to the departed, and we ask them to return to the veil, and greetings to us to the tēnā hoki koe te whare wānanga nei, te whare nei te tonu te whare wānanga nei, to this hallowed walls, this hallowed institution. Kia koe reke te rangatira, kia koutou māna kai whakahaere o tēnei kaupapa tēnei wana. Thank you, Nick, and to the facilitators of this conference. I greet you. Hoki a kia koutou e ho to the delegates who have come, and thank you for attending my little intervention this afternoon. I have to say that once upon a time when there was something called an artist talk, it was usually the time when the delegates all went and did their shopping. So I sincerely acknowledge your intent in foregoing your retail therapy to come and witness the interventions. And finally, I salute the two artists present to your presentation today and to yours tomorrow, Paul. My comrades in arms, tēnā koutou. I ask you please, my intervention, I don't know what this word actually means, but my intervention takes the form of I'm going to tell some stories. So please, I ask of you, please allow your mind to travel. If you can. Please allow your mind to travel. Please allow your mind to travel to another place in time. Please allow your mind to travel to a far distant place of Aotearoa, New Zealand, Tika Maui, North Island, to a place before the age of metal. It's called for any sort of iron, te ao kohatu. Please allow your mind to travel to this place with me. Please allow yourself to see in this place a densely forested place. A green place with bright light, the bright light of this place, intense sunlight, and lush and rugged hills and forested hills. See this in your mind and imagine a community there, a fortified position, a citadel, which we call a patu watawata. So allow yourself to see this in this place, in this time of high summer, of te raumati, of the summer, the high summer. The light is very bright, and the glare is reflecting off the dirt and the sand. It's a bright hot day, similar to what we are feeling these days in Cambridge. This is the high summer, this is the season of te wapakanga, this is the season of war. This is the time when the crops and the food has been safely stored, and all preparation is made for the oncoming summer, with the constant threat of other communities coming and taking your resources. So imagine this feeling of this time of people under this constant sense of vigilance and possible threat of other communities. If you can feel this rigor, this sense, this palpable sense in the air. The people are busy preparing and adding to the fortifications of the park, similar to these posts you see in the museum. So the people are erecting a large post to form a central sail of the fortifications. The people are busy doing this, they're active day and night to repair and strengthen the defences against possible assault. And then there's a season of high tension in the air, like I said, and the people are sending runners constantly to the frontier of the boundaries to ascertain if the approach of any oncoming groups, so that the community is on high alert. There's also this sense of tension that you could almost taste in the air amongst the community, because the young matator, the young men of the community have been fighting. The young men, the hotheads, have been engaged all morning and into the afternoon in fighting amongst themselves. And bones are being broken. The fight is vicious and hard, and they're fighting each other, and the people feel this tension and the sense of all this urgency in the air from these young men of fighting each other, challenging each other, assaulting each other. They are doing this because they are assaulting each other and fighting each other for the position of who's going to go into the hole for this posting war. They are fighting for that, to choose who's going to be that person, and it's brutal, and they are hitting each other. And bones are being broken, as I said, for who is the person who will stand in this hole as the community erects this new post, like those treasures you see in that museum. So the feeling is very, very strong. Eventually, one of these young men attains that position to go in the hole. Those same men that he fought, those other matator, those other hotheads that fought each other for this position, now completely changed their attitude, and they are fully committed to supporting and honouring their relative who's going to go in the hole. So they take these young men. The young men take the flax ropes. They take hold of these flax ropes, and as they hold with all their strength and all their commitment, as this post is lowered over the hole with the young boy standing inside this hole. So the young men are holding this rope. They will not let go of this rope. Their muscles are all starting to burn and sink, and the tension on the flax rope is singing as they hold on to this rope, and they will not let go of this rope. They hold on to it. They won't let go. And all of the people around in the community are present in this moment, this defining moment. The women are all there. They take pieces of obsidian, of volcanic black glass, and they high themselves to honour this boy. And they cut themselves and lacerate themselves. And they cut along here, and they sing, and they cry. And the blood flows off them and coagulates and forms sticky tendrils that touch Baba to Nuku, that touch the ground, to communicate to this boy in this hole. They give of that. All these women are cutting themselves, calling out to this moment. The whole community is there. They're all around this hole, this boy. And they chant and they sing and they make the air swirl and swirl and swirl around. The boy looks up. He stands in this hole. He's in this hole. He's there with his people. All he can see up in this hole is a ring of light around this post and the hole. And he sees this halo of light. That's all he can see, this boy, as he looks up. And all of his people are there honouring him in this moment. They all stand up. They won't let go of their rope. Measurement of life, this other measurement of life. Before this other measurement of life was imposed on this measurement of life, before that, before we were explored, before we were discovered, before we were collected, catalogued, before we were subject of anthropological dissertation. Before that, before we were the subject of glossy coffee table books and blockbuster museum exhibitions. Before that, perhaps that place is the last place we have left. That is a non-negotiable space. Perhaps that has always been that way. Perhaps that has always been the space that is ours. Now I want to talk to you about something different that you're all familiar with. This word object. Allow yourselves please to imagine an object. This object is a rectangular shaped object. It's made of metal. It's shaped like this. Okay. It's shaped like that. And it is in the form of a grill. So it's a big, heavy metal grill, okay? On this grill, underneath this grill, are a series of sharp metal spikes that protrude from the bottom of this grill, this metal grill. On top of this grill are on the corners are four metal eyelets, like so, connected to chains. And the chains all around like this to suspend this grill. I'm sure you can see this. See this grill. The sheer weight of this grill lowers and lowers and lowers. It lowers down and it penetrates my back. The weight of this grill as it continues its advance slowly until it pierces the skin of my back, and the pain is excruciating. And it continues, and it continues as it presses itself down into my back. The human is an amazing creature. The human has the ability to adapt and cope with all kinds of pain. Soon, I become accustomed to this grill piercing my back. As time progresses, the grill has gone so much into my back that the skin and the flesh of my back grows over the grill. I start to find it difficult to remember the time before the grill. I mean, my life seems the same, normal. I move around, I'm alive. The grill is in my back. The only time I remember it's here is that when I go to lift up my arms, I can't lift up my arms any further than because something prevents it. But I find it's getting hard to remember the time before the grill. Something inside of me compels me to say, I must take the grill out of my back. So I reach down like so. I take my arms and I go like this, and I try to pull the grill from my back. I go like this. It's too hard. I can't do it. I try again, but the time goes by. I try again. I lean forward. I crouch down. I take the two hands. I must pull the grill out. I just can't do it. I say to myself, you can do this. I'll give it one more try. I take my hands and I just give it everything. And the sound of the suction of the metal parting big party in the face. Ah! I did it. I pick up the screw. The moment that I dreamed of has arrived. I can't believe it. Wait. It's not what I thought was going to happen. I look at the room. I look at my back. Half my back is gone. It's gone. There's a big hole in my back. I look down at the ground. Some of the sharp metal spikes off the ground, they're not there. They're corroded and they're gone. Where could they have gone? I look closer at the ground. My blood and my flesh over time has made this patina on the metal ground. And they look like roses. So I take the girl and I stand the girl up. And I stand the girl next to me. And I say to the girl, I define you and you define me. And together the girl and I face the new changes together. The things that we've been talking about in this conference, they're going to require a lot. They're going to involve a lot of pain also. It's not a comfort. That's not a comfort situation. It's not. It's definitely not. It's definitely not a convenience one. But if we're really going to have these changes, then there's going to have to be some bearing of the soul, like me and my friend grew up. There simply is. Yeah, that's the end of my story, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. The clear distinction between appropriation and incorporation. Because from what I know, and Māori contact with Europe has been an ongoing, since day one, process of incorporation, of incorporating Pākehā ideas and Pākehā technology into a Māori agenda. I don't know how it's gone so far the other way, but I can definitely say that we definitely have a healthy history of that, and so in that I'm determined to always defend Māori agency. That we paid a lot. We paid a lot to get here. We shouldn't forget what that in the name of that agency, what the old people were prepared to do to ensure our survival. Yeah. We sold our grandfathers. We sold them. We exchanged them. We participated in that market, as horrid as it might seem in 21st century morality, but we did that in the name of survival. You know, the chiefs quickly, before the turn of the 18th century, the chiefs quickly got on ships and went to Port Jackson, very quickly. And they came back and they said, we have seen the way that the Pākehās are treating the blackfellas. We see the way that they treat them, and they treat them like dogs. And they said to each other and amongst themselves, they said, they will come and take the country by force of arms, because we would if we were them. Yeah. So let's be under no illusion here about that.
I mean, appropriation is a term that is commonly used in art history and still contemporary practices in terms of understanding some of the strategies that artists have developed. It allowed a certain kind of postmodern state of things where things were uprooted or lost its origin, and I think it's also closely in dialogue with the colonial project as well. It's a visual practice or a visual strategy that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, and I think in response to appropriation, for me, what I'm trying to think in my practice and how I work instead of appropriation is radical listening. And what is radical listening? If you're really careful in terms of your subject matter and how you're researching it and how you're in dialogue with it, then necessarily it's being translated differently. So in these methods that I'm trying to impose on myself to relate differently with my source material through that type of radical listening, then hopefully I'm moving away from appropriation.
If I could just very quickly follow up with thanks there, I think thank you to both of you, because I guess part of my question was also what are the alternatives, and what alternatives might there be? And I think in a sense we're all in this room and elsewhere looking for alternative strategies, alternative ways forward. And I think certainly for me that's really helped, and I hope we can open it up a little bit. Thank you.
I have the microphone there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you both for your work, and I'm going to follow on from a conversation I had with Jacqueline earlier today and then also yesterday about the different ways that museums position. So when we're talking about appropriation and when we're talking about remaking our language and being sensitive about our language, and Jacqueline mentioned the whole notion about using artists. And when we talk about artists, we always talk about interventions. And when we talk about communities, we talk about relationships. And I think it's quite an interesting thing. And I said to Jacqueline today, she was the first person that started to talk about knowledge-based practices and how few times we've used the idea of knowledge. And then with George, one of the things that your performance really brought to mind, and it partly relates to the issue of repatriation, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is that the presence of absence is not the absence of presence. So when we talk about giving things back and decolonizing museums, potentially we're leaving absences within the institution, but those absences don't erase anything. Those absences are actually painful and need to be dealt with as well. And so one of the things that your work just brought that up to me more fully, which is, what is the function of disruption and discomfort, and where are the spaces for reconciliation that we're trying to create, and how are we trying to do that? And both days, these things, they're orbiting and you may or may not have comments on those, but both of your work has sort of those notions of the ghostly forms. And at some point this afternoon, I remembered A Christmas Carol, which is the ghost of the past, the present, and the future. And in a sense, that's what we're sort of dealing with.
Yeah, well, it's definitely up to us to, nature does give us the opportunity to determine the method of payment. And if we ignore that, then she will determine the method of payment. So in the case of the return of the mokomoko from France, they told me some things, and I heard them, and I said I will be the payment for their return, and for those ancestors to go home as they did. I remain in France, in the place where they originally left from Rouen. I'm there, and I think that I speak from my own point of view. I think that with these returns, there is a fantastic opportunity for us to commission at home, commission Māori contemporary artists to produce irreplaceable works of art to give to these nations in return for these immeasurable treasures of art in the form of these ancestors. There's an opportunity for us to reciprocate with a small printer saying that in 100 years you will give them back, and we will give you the new irreplaceable treasures of art. And this is a relationship that is eternal, and the door's never closed. You know, I think that this would show the ancestors how much they mean to us. This would show the nations concerned how much they mean to us, and it would show the Māori people how much they mean to us. That's my personal view. So I make that payment. These treasures held in these collections are extremely potent, as you all know. They are examples of the supernature, you could say. The reason why that is because they are qualified by death itself. You know, any mistake or error made in the intent of their creation cost a life. That was the rules that they played by then, and this imbues them with a certain kind of rigor that I try to personally in my life get close to that. And I think that this has repercussions in this condition that I call, people have heard me say this before, I call this globalization of mediocrity in the name of money. That's resulting in the retardation of thinking and a poverty of spirit. And I think that this type of rigor represents the antidote to that. And believe me, I think it's happening quicker than we think, this globalization of mediocrity. And in that respect, museums do represent to me a chance to be some form of antidote to that, to this wider global dumbing downness. You know, indigenous communities were the first to feel its effects because we were the first people to have lost these roles, these life-fulfilling roles, to have them no longer relevant in our lives, and we got bored. As the English say, it's a fate worse than death. You're bored, and it results in self-hatred, self-loathing, and self-harm. And so the roles played in all these initiatives and all these examples that have been presented in the conference go to some way of arresting this global boredom that we're being bored to death. And I don't think it's just a case of the museum saying, oh, we must include this and we must include that and we must change this. I think it still sounds a bit kind of paternal to me. And that somehow the other players in the game, i.e. the communities, the artists, and so on, have to be the ones also saying we must do this and we must include the museums in our lives. You know? Yeah. You know, I'm tired of hearing you guys say that to me. I'm going to start saying it back to you. You know. Oh, I feel like it's a good idea if I reach out to you. You know. And whenever you speak, I'll call what you do an intervention, from today onwards. Yeah. And you know, and I'm not here to be reproaches. We all have a lot at stake here, right? We all do. We are a family in this. You know, and families have good. Sometimes they get on, and sometimes they don't. Huh? Believe me. Yes.
Yeah, please.
You?
Oh, please go.
I wondered if I could relate some of this back to a question that came to my mind when Michael Barrett was talking about the engagement with the African diaspora in Stockholm. And you were talking in part about something that many of us have done in many situations, which is bringing, whether they're Indigenous source community people or diaspora people, into our stores and giving them the chance to encounter and engage with objects. I've been struck by the sheer heterogeneity of people's responses, and it strikes me that some of those responses are very much easier to talk about than others, and it's also easy for us to exhibit some of those responses if we can exhibit an object and say that certain elders or representatives saw this and it affirmed its the way it exemplified certain community values or aspects of collectivity. That's a proposition that we can weave very easily into our galleries. But I imagine most of us have witnessed quite different kinds of encounters, and for example, some Christian Pacific Islanders actually sometimes have I'm thinking of a particular instance, but I don't want to sort of tell the whole story because it's too anecdotal, but some older women not so long ago actually seemed quite quite disturbed by coming into proximity with some historic pieces that echoed various moments in various earlier projects, some of which were, and some of these moments were, I think, a little disturbing for everyone present. Some of them were, in a sense, more funny, actually. There was an occasion when a pastor from the Western Solomon Islands who was in London to be knighted by the Queen, a church leader, came to the British Museum stores, and he sort of admired everything but said, boy, this stuff is dangerous. Sorcery, I'm glad you've got it here. I wouldn't want this near my village. You curators really lead dangerous lives. And I'm wondering if there are possibilities to take risks and exhibit material and say this is dangerous, and things like that. Is it possible to try and do more justice to the sheer diversity of those responses and stories than I think we really do at the moment?
If I can just comment on the previous question, I'm actually a bit surprised that everybody's very celebratory of repatriation. I think there's a consensus that it's a great thing, and I generally would want to think that it is, but it's also based on the presumption that museums in the West are clinical spaces that are pure and have been preserving these artifacts over the years in a clinical fashion. But Clémentine Delis has written about this double toxicity that exists in artifacts, where museums have been also injecting a lot of chemicals in some of the artifacts in terms to stabilize them. And then reimagining what it would entail to actually repatriate some artifacts that is a ticking bomb, basically, in terms of the chemical possibilities of entering new spaces or returning to the source community. So I just want to add that little kind of carefulness in terms of, which hasn't occurred during this conversation so far, in terms of repatriation, that I think one needs to keep in mind what kind of treatment the artifacts have perhaps suffered in the course of its time in the storage in order to exist for perpetuity.
Let's just talk about the case of the toi moko, the moko mokai. They are returning home not as artifacts, they come home as people. So I understand you're saying about objects and certain works of art, but in the context of their return home, as far as I know, they come home as people. They come home with full funerary rites, and they are afforded rituals and funerary ceremonies. So if you could put that aside, what you're saying about as artifacts and from these clinical spaces, sure, but the desire for the people of Aotearoa New Zealand is that they want their people to come home. I don't. I'll be completely honest. I feel that this is difficult for me to talk about it in front of my kinsman and all the work that he does. It's very difficult because of my respect for him. Kia koe te rangatira, ka korua mā. We have foregone the opportunity perhaps to host, to stage, but then again maybe the institutions here are not ready also. We could stage some critical expositions around these tupuna, around these ancestors, and what I mean by that is this whole story of that. How did they come to be here? How did our grandfathers come to be here in these glass vitrines in Europe? And what lessons of human nature that we can all benefit by that we sold them, that we exchanged them. It's like I spoke to Laura last night at dinner. We got heated about it. It was good. About this idea that imagine, folks, that some aliens, some extraterrestrials landed in the quad in a spacecraft this afternoon, and they had this superior technology, and all we had was some artifacts from here, and Nick's grandfather and my grandfather's head or whatever, and that's all we could get to trade with them in that moment to have access to that technology in the name of agency. You know, that is what those Māori people did in that time, you know? And I refuse to let the West decry it as a horrid practice, and I also refuse our own people to deny and hate this practice because there are lessons about human nature in it for all of us. That this is what people will do in the name of agency. They will take what they can to survive, you know. And if we let's look, you know, like let's look at the reaction of the Māori to the initial context of the West. From day one, we took that stuff. We are still in the, you know, trying to get the new stuff. You know, in some ways, the people of Australia are superior to us because they said no. They said to Cook and all them, no, we don't need your mirrors and your beads. They're not going to help us out there in the desert. So no thanks. And when are you leaving so we can make ceremony for you leaving? You know, seriously. And that they could say no to the seduction is almost incomprehensible to me, because we took the opposite approach. We said, yeah, we want it. Don't give it to our neighbours. You know, we want it, and okay, the neighbours don't have it. That means we can go and they can be under us. We can rule them until the stage where everyone's got their new stuff, and then there's some kind of peace. You know, let's not buy into this idea that Marsden and all these guys came along and brought the gospel and the light, and there was peace amongst the tribes. That's got nothing to do with it. The fact is that everybody had guns by then, and it was the fact that everybody had guns that enabled us to face the regiments 20 years later. So, well, I've gone off the track there a bit, sorry, but all I'm saying is that we must own everything of our past. We must own the good and the bad. We must. We can't exist in this kind of form of denial. I don't think it's very healthy for us. I think you know it's unusual for me to come to a conference and see the subject of the toimoko come up so often. You know, it's almost like a kind of to the point of obsession. And but I will say this, and what I said to Laura about them, they do represent to me personally an example they are above the mediocrity. They're above. You don't see them on a T-shirt. The mass media does not consume them. They are not going to be in Beyonce's next music video. They are not going to be in the next Pepsi promotion. They are somehow above all that. And that to me, is a powerful thing in today's mass media banality. It's very, very powerful. And I refuse to let us be put in a situation, either by others or by ourselves, where we deny them. Because they are not representations of the ancestor, they are the ancestors. They are also somehow, as Robley described them, as a kind of a living dead. You know, it's interesting description he gave of them, that they somehow occupy the space between the living and the dead. Yeah, and we must go, in my opinion, we must come a long way as Māori to not feel this collective shame that the Pākehā have put on us about those kinds of things, about that we practiced cannibalism, that the leaders practiced polygamy, and all these other things that are particular to our way of life in those times. They cannot be for 1 second viewed through today's moral lens, I believe. They cannot.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would like to link appropriation, the question of appropriation, with the religious question you asked about the pastor who felt the cultural items and the items coming from back in time. Fetish, because this is what happens also in my country. We have a situation where a lot of people become Christians, so they say, and then they decide to condemn everything to do with culture and tradition. And we've had occasions where we supply artworks to banks or to public places. You get paid to do this. And you put those works up. Very satisfied with your work, and the next day you get a phone call. Come and take these works off, they're fetish. They're all fetish. And these people talking, they tell you they're born again, they belong to Jesus Christ, and therefore these things are fetish, they don't want to have anything to do with it. So you look at it and say, who's appropriating who? Or who's appropriating what? Because here you have these people coming who are Nigerians, who are Africans, who have decided that they're Christians. But they've left the moral message, to me, of Christianity, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. And they have appropriated the ceremonies and the garb, twisted it, reinvented it. They feel superior to everybody else. And then they look at everything that has been produced by our ancestors, everything that was produced by cultural things as fetish. And because of this, they have wiped out any possibility of their children and younger generations from appreciating these objects. And so you have a problem where religion is used to perpetuate ignorance. And the same thing with Islam. I mean, I schooled up north in my country, which is predominantly Muslims. And they tell you, no carving images, you cannot make an image of anything, it must be written. But this is Islamic, Arabic heritage, which they have taken. So they are now dressing like Arabs. They speak only, when it comes to religion, they speak only Arabic. And so you have a problem where there's a huge disconnect. And I think it's a mental thing. Because I grew up listening to cultural music from Benin. I grew up listening to Victor Wifo, who is a prominent musician. I grew up listening to James Brown, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley. So I'm not going to leave all of that, and I enjoyed all these things. I grew up listening to Mozart, and I enjoyed Mozart, I enjoyed Michael Jackson, I enjoyed Victor Wifo, I enjoyed cultural music. So all this has formed who I am. Now, I'm not going to go back and say, no, I must be like my ancestors, who were in the bush, they had no electricity, they had no record players, they only had cultural music. That was their reality. My reality is different. So if I'm going to reinvent myself, or if I'm going to be myself, true to myself, My culture is different from the culture of my ancestors. In real terms, we might share the same traditions, but my culture is different because culture is a living thing. It's the way of life of a people. So the way I'm living now is different from the way my ancestors lived. So if you say you're a Christian and you say, oh, you have to follow Jesus Christ in a particular way, or you have to follow Muhammad in a particular way, then if you're going to Israel for pilgrimage, trek or climb a donkey the way Jesus Christ did it at that time. Or if you're going to enter a plane, which was done by people who are from the West, then there's already a disconnect somewhere. So I think basically where the problem lies is in the mindset, is in the mentality. Is in the mentality, because if we all share a common humanity, then I think focusing on the positives, on what is good, because I mean, a bouquet of flowers is beautiful anywhere. You can't say, oh, because you never did arrangements of bouquets of flowers, it's not in your culture, it's not in your tradition, therefore is it ugly? It can't be. So I think there's a confusion with these words which are bandied around to keep people in silos, you know? But the world is not like that anymore. So I think we need to face a new reality. We need to face a new reality. I'm not going to come and advocate for the bronze works or the ivory works from Benin to be brought back and they go back and keep them in shrines. That reality is over. That was then. If you're going to bring them back now, they have a more positive role they can play. One, they can inspire the younger generation with the level of artistry which they can see. Two, they can also bring about a level of tourism which brings about economic development, which can create employment and stop young people from trying to do illegal migration across through Libya, across the Mediterranean Sea. Three, they can bring about an understanding between people to bring about mutual respect. Because in history, it was reported that, oh, savages killed Captain Phillips. Savages, I mean, the same campaign of calumny against Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. It was done before. Oh, they're savages, they're savages. And when these works got into Europe, the leading art dealer looks at you and says, but these works cannot be produced by savages. So, I think these are all the issues and questions that we have to come to terms with and stop putting things in particular silos which we want to tie down to tradition. Because our culture is different. I mean, this is coming from way back, he's preserving his culture or his tradition, but he's using the microphone. And I'm sure he came here by train. So it's dynamic. I think it's more dynamic than we care to give credit to.
Thank you. Thanks.
One of my adages I live by is two things, in fact, and I say, don't worry, it'll be traditional by this afternoon. And secondly, well, George, nobody said this was a popularity contest. Yeah, so, I'm talking about approval, the seeking of approval, and this idea of tradition. Yeah. Me and Laura were having a bit of a good chewing the gristle last night at our dinner, and I talked about the idea that what if in a situation where the cultures were left with no option but to just walk from the museum, just walk, just say, okay, you're not going to give them back, or we can't get access to them how we'd like. Let's just walk. As drastic and as radical as that sounds, because sometimes humans have had to do that in the past when the cyclone completely obliterates the island. The people carry on. We can't. Maybe that's preferable than saying we can't live and be ourselves until we get our treasures back. Maybe it'll just a case of going, have the same haughty indifference that we feel that is being put on us, and go, keep them. Or don't even say that, just go. That's one, that perhaps there's a way to see that metaphorically. At the same time, my esteemed kinsmen and others are dedicating their lives to the return of all our treasures, wherever they can, the return of these sacred houses, the return of these people. And in some respects, Māori are relatively in a better state, like the lady from Ireland said about. We're in a better relatively better state of play than other communities. But, you know, we had to fight for that. And as James Cook said, you know, they are utterly devoted to war. You know, we are. It's that devotion. It was that devotion to that side of life that's probably ensured our survival through the Holocaust, through the Holocaust of the 20th century. Is that Māori people share love of a good fight. You know, I'll kill you, but I still love you. You know, it's not personal, but you know, it's like that. You know, and we are an interesting example of that. We are, I believe, that Māori have engaged and Māori have resisted, both resisted and engaged wholeheartedly.
Yeah, thank you. Arapara.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to kia ora, George. Just to add on that with the, we Papa got full support from our New Zealand government in 2003. We actually undertook repatriation well before 2003. It was with the full support of the repatriation, but it was the full support of Māori to undertake that, and you know, our submission that we actually helped drafted up, that we presented to our government caucus, wasn't respected. When you look at museums in New Zealand, and the directors of those museums were intimately involved in the exchange and trade, I suppose, under social Darwinism and studying craniology and so forth. When you have a look at the history there, we had politicians actively involved, we had ministers of the Crown actively involved. So I suppose there that just going on in terms of some of the comments around repatriation, yeah, it has been a heck of a journey through there, but the strategies have been calculated. The strategies have been very intentional in terms of creating a pathway on which the outcome there, the name of our repatriation program is called, and Māori, represented Māori advisors and elders from around the country gave the name. It's called Karama Aotearoa. That means Aotearoa's calling. And the hope there that is our ancestors, and reconciling the past histories in terms of how our ancestors arrived in museums in Europe. The call now is for them, absolutely unanimous, to bring them home. And as George was saying, within less than 24 hours, a number of ancestors will be coming back from Germany and America, and they'll be welcomed, and they'll be very similar to a funeral ceremony, and they'll be remembered. And part of that is, and that's part of the reconciliation process of colonisation as well. But I think, you know, follow on just briefly with George, yeah, whenever we undertake repatriation from museums, it is about creating mutually beneficial relationships, and sort of saying thank you. Thank you for looking after our ancestors for all these years, and really acknowledging that aspect of them. And so we're conscious of that as well. And I just wanted to say that in this forum here, because I know I've worked with many of the museum directors in Europe, and I know there's many others there too, but we really acknowledge and appreciate your support in helping us to return our ancestors home, because it does mean a lot. As many of the other people said here, our ancestors, their souls and spirits are still circling around, and it's not complete, and we have to return them home. And it's the only reason why that I'm involved in this. It's not the only program, but this particular program is to see how we can negotiate. And no doubt we talk tomorrow about, you know, strategies at the most government level, you know, all the different levels. That's been intentional, and that's been targeted so that hopefully we can change hearts, change minds to enable that to happen. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. I don't want to cut the discussion off, but I think it's been quite an intense day, and maybe people would like a bit of a break and get outside before we gather at 6:30. Is that right for drinks? Is that we will have more time, well, I think it would be nice to carry on the discussions informally, and we had more time for this set of issues, particularly tomorrow. But I really want to thank all the speakers today, but especially you two for brilliant and very engaging presentations.